I think let's start with talking about your homework. All of those images. I'll explain what's happening as we go, and then if some of those questions were not answered, we'll address the questions. So, gradient chamfer and angled cut. Let's see. Oh yeah. Let's start with. These are more like the questions, right? And then
Yeah. This is
this is the homework.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually modeled something like this. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Let's see. I did this for work, but it's been released. I did this for Bosky.
Cool.
Let's see. This. Yeah, it's like close enough, I think.
Cool bosses.
There you go. It's actually very close.
Yeah, it is. It looks sweet.
But yeah, let's see. The point was, and for all the students watching it, the point was to find something that you'll be modeling, or want to model, and just break it down, right? Just mentally, because it really helps you process what kind of tools you'll be using and like what actually is happening in the design in the real world, and where all those limitations are coming from. So clearly, a box to start is a good one, because usually they're like boxes with a bunch of, like you said, a bunch of chamfers. The one thing I want to point out is in Fusion, they usually in modeling it's called chamfer no matter what. It's like an edge treatment, and they call it like in sub-D modeling they can call it like a bevel or chamfer or rounded chamfer. In Fusion they call it a fillet or fillet. I'm sure it's called fillet, but basically anything rounded is like one tool, and anything straight as an edge treatment is another tool. So let's see. When we have that box, this edge, we can do a fillet, which will be rounded. And the other one, we can do chamfer, which will be a straight edge, like this. So that's usually the difference.
You can see a lot of all of them. I call chamfer.
Yeah, that's fine. Because I mean, technically, they're all called chamfers. And one thing to point out, like, even though there is a tool for this specifically, which is super convenient, like people who come from sub-D really value that. But it's not the only way to achieve that shape if we have a box. If I go back, just undo it. There are some times when it's impossible to perform an operation like that for whatever reason, like the Fusion will not be able to calculate it. You can always cheat it and go into like a side view of this box and just do a sketch like that, and then press pull it, and it will do the cut. So the benefit, and it's still a chamfer. It matters only in manufacturing, or when you actually taking this into real world and you process it through like a cam process where like an actual drill needs to go over it, and do it. So that's when it matters. But for us as a concept artist, it doesn't matter like how to arrive to a shape, which means the benefit of this, knowing that you can do it, is you can actually like add more interest to those things right away. So for example, you'll only be cutting away this section.
What if you cut that away and then you go back into the sketch?
A lot of times it's possible. For that, you need to go edit the sketch in the timeline, and like if you're watching this and we haven't explained the timeline yet, like we will at some point. But basically, you go back and you just let's say you wanted to alter your sketch, and then stop sketch. It doesn't always compute, but the sketch will be there. So whenever you're done with the sketch, it turns itself off, but the sketch is always there. So you can go back and just add that in. That's the beauty of working with sketches, because you have control of what you're adding, of what you're deleting and stuff. If at some point you didn't want all of this like weird shit in there, you just select, because you're still using the same sketch you used before, and you just delete all of that. And
what is the difference? Sorry, what's the difference between the press pull and just the extrude?
That's a good question, and I think it's good to understand it early on. I'm gonna be like creating new stuff for every example. So let's say we have some sort of a shape, and this was created without using any sketches. But we will create some sort of a sketch on the side here. And now I have a sketch in the browser. You usually press pull from sketches. So if I try, and let me stop the sketch. If I try to press pull here, it will work because it's basically adjusting what you have here. And also, if I haven't explained that before, you can choose between modify existing feature, new offset, or automatic. Usually automatic works fine, like you'll figure out the way. And then you can also press pull the sketches, and that's when you control whether it's joining, cutting, or new body. But extrude, and actually it's good to mention that press pulling also works inward as well, right? So you can cut with that. But a lot of times, I'm trying to think of a good example. You press extrude,
well, I could already see, when you did a press pull on that top thing, it didn't actually extrude. It just moved the whole thing up. Like when you do, it also moved the lower part.
Yeah, that's probably a good example. Like I'm not 100% sure what's behind the mechanism, but there is a difference in terms of how it will interact with existing history, basically. A lot of times it's safe to say if you want, like I call all of this, and I think it's correct to call all of this a feature. So basically all of these are just features, right? And when you want something new, like you said, instead of press pulling, you can do extrude and mark it as new body, and this will give you a completely new body using the existing profile. Before I forget, one real cool trick that I actually learned after recording the tutorial is because Fusion changes the interaction with objects a lot and stuff like that. They constantly try to improve it, but it actually fucks with your how you remember how to do things, right? So before, like maybe a year ago, you used to be able to just like click somewhere and start move body, but by default right now it selects a face that you want to move. So if you wanted to move that body, you need to switch to bodies and reselect it, and then it will be able it will let you move the body, because if you try to move the face, it's actually another thing besides press pulling. You technically can move the face. You can actually like rotate it and stuff like that. Like it may break your design and stuff, but it's possible. Like they opened this option for us, but in return, what we got is the default action was moving a body, which was very convenient, and moving a face is not. But what I discovered is it really is interactive. So like it depends on where you start pressing. If you hover onto the face and press right click and then move, it will move the face. But if you highlight an edge and right click move, it will select the whole body.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's something that I didn't even know about. So yeah, that's basically the difference. But let's come back to this. I mean this is pretty straightforward. That's how I approach stuff. You visually identify like, oh, the list is going to be achieved through some sketching, some chamfers, and then create a pattern out of things that repeat, because patterns is about repeating stuff. And it usually makes sense to finish one piece before you start repeating. Although it's possible to make it interactive, but it's kind of a pain. And then mirroring, they don't really have a word extrude, so it's like press pull, and I mean, yes, like that extrude that we were talking about. It's kind of, in my eyes, it's like different from the sub D version. So yeah, this is all pretty straightforward. Let's just move on to that other image. This is a vape. No, I'm kidding. It's a it's a airbrush. Yeah. But anything is a vape if you're brave enough.
With this one, I had a few questions actually on how to tackle some stuff. Like, so let's say the green part, right? Where I did the green sketches, there seems to be a slight slope in it. So I thought if I just make a cylinder and extrude it, I don't know how I would then still get that slope. So do you have to do like one of those revolve things, or is there a different way? To make
definitely multiple ways. Let's actually. I'm gonna save that on the desktop, and I'm gonna open a new file, and let's just model that thing. Like, I mean, not all of it, but as far as we can take it, since it brings more questions. Attaching the canvas here. Just for reference, I'm not gonna use it for scale, but it's good to have it here. So one way to achieve that slope would be you can have. Oh wait, hold on. Let me control the opacity of this canvas.
It's so nice that I love that the browser, that everything has its own thing. Like
yeah, it's like a separate folder almost.
Yeah, it's really nice.
So let's just do a cylinder roughly this big, and then we're gonna move it again. See, like I highlighted the edge, and that let me select the full body. It's super useful now. Okay, so just make it straight.
Do you type a lot, or do you just usually wing your measurements? Because every time you create something, you can, like, say minus 15 millimeters or whatever.
I usually just move it around and like press pull like this, because the one trick that not everybody understands is the amount of the stepping that happens in the digits really depends on your level of zoom. So if you zoom in closer or like zoom out, the stepping will be in like tens of millimeters, like 10 millimeters more, 10 more, 10 more, 10 more. But if you zoom in, your stepping is now half a millimeter.
Oh, gotcha.
And then more. It's like working with jewelry and like having a magnifying glass. The more you zoom in, the more detail you will get out of it.
Yeah.
So I think that makes sense. But so usually you can control that by like, oh, zoom in, make it a little tighter, zoom out, like do more. But if it doesn't work, I'll just estimate it and I will be like, oh, this needs to be 25 millimeters. So I will do both, type it in and move it. Let's just move this higher so we can see the sketch. So the slope, sometimes when I don't really care, I will just do a chamfer at an angle. So this, you just start by creating a small chamfer, and then this will allow you to control the how far it's like sloping.
Oh, that's cool.
It's not very it's not very precise per se, but it creates that necessary slope. And then here you can also add a fillet, and it will like slightly like smooth it out like that.
Gotcha.
So you get to that shape. This is just one way, right? The other way, we'll create this parallel, would be to sketch it out just like you said with a revolve. You define the length, and this will also be your center, and then you sketch out the profile that you need. Just like with pen tool in Photoshop, if you click and drag, you can start doing the curve. But I actually don't like the lack of control there, so what I do is, this is going to be half of our diameter. So you can do it like this, right? Like this is...
Okay.
Because I clicked and dragged, it gave me that control. But another good way would be estimate where that curve is going to be turning, have it like that, and then just, let's close this, add a fillet on this edge, and it will tell you where it makes sense to stop, kind of. So definitely several ways. So like, let's say we're satisfied with that. You just go create revolve, select this as a sketch, your center as an axis, and it will revolve. This way, from a sketch, because everything has a profile in real world, you know, you have more control through profiling, and this is a figure of revolving for sure. So go ahead.
So you can already do, you know, fillets in your sketch. Do you usually prefer to already do it in the sketch, or then later on the model? Because you can, or is it just preference?
It's just it really depends on you. Sometimes, and again, you already saw it when I was doing it. Sometimes when you start fillets in the sketch, it will do this, right? Like it will fuck up the sketch. But it's definitely not possible if you first turn this into a solid and then try to do that fillet. It won't let you go past that. So it really depends on, like, if you know that you... Because having all those little extra lines on the sketch, it will end up showing in your geometry later if you missed that. And it's easy to miss that thing, because on this level of zoom, the fillet might look okay. Especially when, of course, like a cube is nothing, but when you have some squiggly line and you start adding those fillets, like having something like this is easy to miss, like all those little spikes that are extra, especially when they're tiny like that. That's just impossible. Like that's why I would prefer to do it on a solid body. Now from here we have this, let's bring the opacity back. Oh, we have this nice cutout that also indicates that our cylinder is hollow inside and it has some thickness, right?
Yeah.
So that just means that we need to use shell, like from, for example, from this face. It basically empties out the object like that, and then you control that thickness. It's very useful, and then it can be like this thick or like this is about right. It's very useful when you're trying to create things that are like you trying to show that thickness, just like in this example. It's not very useful to actually do this for everything that you model, because most of the time you will never see what's going on. But when you're layering several objects that, for example, insert into one another, just like in this example, I believe that's like a spare tip, right, sitting in there.
No, it's the so there's a needle going through, and this is what holds the needle in the thing.
Okay. Oh, so like it goes in, and then you rotate this to fix it, right?
Yeah, so you fasten the needle with that, and then when you pull back the trigger, the needle goes back, and then it lets paint through.
I got it. Okay, so so we have that holo, and then we can also, looking at this at the canvas, we can predict what type of cut we need to do from the profile. Just like that's exactly why we do the exercises like this, right? Because you start to predict, and I've done it enough when I know what the profile is. It looks like a trapezoid. So we will do it from the side again. That's not the right one. From the side, I will do maybe a slightly deeper one, like that. And then again, several ways to continue with this. We can either finish the sketch and cut it away, or we can do split body. The only reason to use that would be that you wanna have a chance to reuse this part that was split. No, it's actually like, see, like we split this off.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to reuse it somehow, for example, like pretend that it's sitting in there, right? That automatically makes the design a little more interesting.
Yeah.
But if you really didn't need it, then instead of going with a split body, we would have just finished the sketch like this and pulled it, and it would do the cut. We actually do two sides, and this way we totally cut it away, and we don't have that part. So sometimes it makes sense to keep those parts, just like because it creates that extra complexity. I always treat the edges so it's going to be like a little rounded, and I always add either a chamfer or a fillet depending on what it is and how it looks. This looks like it's been machined, so like very likely that it's gonna have like some sort of chamfer like that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's this fastener inside. Let's see. Let's talk about other parts here.
So with the shell, the face you click on, that's the one that opens up basically.
Yeah, I definitely show it later, but I think it doesn't hurt to, because like if we discuss it now, you will also hear about it like in the next lessons, and it would be just more familiar for you.
Yeah.
Let's do an example with this existing one. Turn off the canvas for now. Basically, when you select shell, and I have shell in my panel already. If you select shell from this face, like the outer face, it doesn't know like what you're trying to do. If you select shell from the side, it at least knows to start from that face and holo everything that like it can. But it's also possible to click shell and select like this, like closer to the edge. It will select the full body, and you won't see it, but you can see like this little preview, the darker versus lighter. It's telling you that it's shelling everything inside, but it's keeping all like everything else intact. A good way to see what's happening is, I don't remember if I'm talking about the measuring tools, but section analysis is super useful. is just like a temporary way to see the cut of what's happening.
That's so awesome.
And then sometimes you will click and just leave it like that, and there's no way to come back. So you just have to go back to section analysis and select some sort of like origin and just push everything further away. It's like a one-time thing. So yeah, that's how shell works. And shell works sometimes in mysterious ways. It's a lot of times, if it's some organic structure, it will be harder to compute. You know, it's just a general rule. Whenever you're doing something in Fusion, just remember that it's all about computing, and it will not always let you do that. It means that there are some technical limitations. Okay, so let's see what else we got here as a question. The tip, right?
Yeah, like especially the cutouts on the very you know, on the very tip. I don't know if you can see it well, but
yeah,
it seems tricky.
Let's make the tip then. I would say again, just as many ways as you want to go about it. Let's start with the cylinder first. So the way I usually approach anything to start is you just identify something simple to start with, and then you figure out how to move on with this. If you start with a cylinder, you can see that it has that pattern. It's not really knurling, because like this is knurling, like it's KNURL, I think it's spelled. It's basically, or KNURN. It's this metallic pattern that helps you grip, right?
Oh yeah.
So one way to do this would be, and we don't quite see the profile here, but one way to do it is just draw one of them. And of course it's good when everything is straight up and symmetrical. So you just have one, you press pull it. Again, I don't remember if I mentioned, but when you press pulling, if you want something to match exactly, you just click on the face that it needs to match with. So we have this, and before, again, two options from here. You can join it, which means it will become one with that body. Let's turn off the cameras. Which means now you have common edges to work with, like that. Because if we go back and edit the feature and say instead of joining we do new body, we don't have a common edge because it's a separate mesh. If you try to do this, like, you know, it's separate.
Yeah.
If you're trying to have this nice flow, it makes sense to actually join them. So one way, we take the circular pattern tool. It's hidden in patterns, circular pattern. I also have it here when we were setting up the UI. So you select the mesh or the body that you want to go around. You select the axis, and that's when I would usually type in something like 35. And that was a good guess. I'm sorry. That looked like magic, but it was just a guess. So sometimes you'll do this. Sometimes you can just control it by dragging this little thing. For me, yeah, it's mostly about like I think I'll just like type in like 40 or whatever, or 30. That should be good enough. But the point is, if you do this, you end up with like 30 bodies, and then you have to go and merge them, and then go one by one and fillet the point of connecting point. So for me, I've recently been doing the other way, going the other way. I will join it. I will do the edge treatment right away, like this. I will also do like maybe a chamfer here. Just like some extras that will show up only in the render, if at all. If it's something close up. If not, if you're modeling for like high poly baking, if somebody's watching who's modeling this for high poly, it makes sense as well because it will bake. But other than that, it's just an extra complication. But anyway, so we do this, and then we go to circular pattern, and instead of patterning bodies, we will pattern faces, which is like patterning features pretty much. It means that we will select every face that belongs to this feature, like this. And I mean every face, because if you don't, it's not going to pattern. And then select the axis and say 35 and go okay. So this way I didn't have to go merging everything and then filleting everything separately.
Yeah.
You basically only do this once and then you pattern what you've done. So we end up with this more or less good looking thing.
Nice.
Let's turn back the canvas on. So this, again, see how you have a repeating element?
Yeah.
You can totally reuse that because we'll go into bodies, grab this thing, Control-C, Control-V, move it, and then we will go into scale. And the trick with scale is that it only lets you pick an existing point, and we need to scale it from the center, so there is no point in the center of that thing. It only see like the point is running around. It only lets me pick something existing.
Yeah.
A workaround is go into sketch, and it works for any body or like any object. Go into sketch, select point, click a face, and you'll be able to like just put a point in there. Stop the sketch. Now you have a point in there, and you can use that point to scale with. So you will select the entity, and then you just go and reselect the point to be the center. Now you can do uniform scale from the center.
Okay.
So something like that. But again, of course, before we do that, we should probably like nail the profile. If you're going, or if you need this like specific profile, you just work from the side, kind of define the center, sketch this profile out. Let's say like with all the weird dips and stuff. And then you rotate it or revolve it. This will be the center. So that's one way. And then obviously we can match it there. We can now scale this. It doesn't really see how like it doesn't really match. For me it would make sense to start working from like this is where I would extrude. Just extrude a thing real quick and just make it thicker.
Okay, yeah.
And that's when I would use the pattern on that thing.
Yeah.
Rather than creating it separately. Because if you want something to match, it makes sense to work from an existing profile on that thing. Just a quick and easy example. If we have a box, if I need to create another box that matches it, if I go from a weird face like that, I will need to match it like that, right? Which I'll have to spend some time matching it. But if I wanted to actually match it, I will just take this face and extrude it and make it a new body. and this will be a much better match.
Yeah.
Even though like our final result, for example, is not exactly a box, it's just like a good way to match things together like that. Just work from existing faces. In terms of the ends here, first of all, we see that it's definitely hollow inside, and we know about it, so we can either go through the pain of which body was it? Oh, it's selecting a sketch right there. Let's turn this off. Turn this off. We can go through the pain of actually shelling everything here. And as I dragged, the fusion started to think, because it's a more complex shape, and it needs to actually think about all those little dips that it needs to preserve the thickness with. So the more complicated and see, like, because you dragged, it's just a random number input. So because you haven't calculated it, it's kind of a pain for fusion. Let's see if I can cancel that out. And now it's stuck. But basically, it wasn't able to calculate. You will encounter stuff like this as you work, and you will be able to predict when not to do like stupid stuff like this that I just did. But again, you can shell. Let's try to shell it from the other side, maybe. Just put it like 0.5. Yeah, so it's letting us shell it at 0.5. We can, you can also shell from both ends, because as you select the faces to shell, if I go click Control, it will let me add to face selection. So like it's shelling from several, but this cylinder is separate, so.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can hide it and just shell from here. Just put 0.5. It doesn't really matter. So my point is, it doesn't matter, or it doesn't make sense sometimes to actually shell the full object. You can just pretend that there is an opening here. Just cut it in like this. And no one will ever be looking down into the nozzle. So like, who cares?
I like the shelling though, because like I'm interested in 3D printing and stuff like that, and
oh yeah,
the stuff
totally.
I print with is super. It's the resin, so it's quite expensive. So it's best to keep your thing, your stuff.
No, yeah. If we're talking about, and you reminded me that like with you, we're talking about everything from like 3D printing perspective. You also have to keep in mind that all the sizing needs to be correct, right? Because right now I'm like, I don't really care about what I'm doing here. Yeah. But yes, if you wanted to print, of course, it makes sense to actually recreate the thing as close to an original as possible. Like, let's say you're making a nozzle, a replacement, or something very like particular on the end that will help you like get a better result. Or something more interesting, like just make it look like a cheese grater, like all openings, and it will spray in a very particular way. For that, yes, you will need to think about it. But for concept, this is good enough to sell the idea that it's hollow inside.
Yeah.
And then from there, you will go in and do the sketch of the profile of that cut, basically. So it's gonna be like, this is the center, because Fusion automatically finds it. This isn't the center of rotation though. It's kind of shouldn't matter that much. Like that. Then let's just say it looks like this. We press pull it to the side. do the edge treatment right away because we will just do exactly what we did before with a circular pattern. We do circular pattern. This is what falls into our feature that we want to pattern on this axis, and there's like is it 6 or maybe 5? There you go. So you get that like nice, interesting shape.
Yeah, that's really cool.
This is not symmetrical because it's 5 versus 3. If I go back and like if I made a mistake or something, oops, did I? I suppressed it by accident. Like just made it. It's there, but it's suppressed, so it's not showing. Right click, edit feature. Instead of 5, type in 3. Click OK. Now it actually fits.
But you can go back. It's so useful. I mean, if you set things up well, then you can really later on in your design still make some changes, right, with the timeline.
Exactly. Yeah. It has like its own repercussions. So just like I like to say the butterfly effect. If you're trying to change something here, it's just gonna roll the marker all the way down, and it may influence your like whatever you've done here.
Yeah.
Like if I go back and delete this original cylinder, everything down the line will be broken, and you won't be able to fix that.
Yeah.
And just for the visuals, like I can just add some fillet here or a nice chamfer. All of that sort of sometimes saves material, which I do for 3D printing, like I chamfer stuff. But it also looks a little better. It's all this little edge treatment in 3D printing. This comes out really nice. It a lot of times, the more planar changes you have, the less stepping you will see. Like you're less likely to see stepping in a curved face, rather than you will see stepping in a flat face. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is how we get here.
Cool.
But this,
actually, you can pattern a feature, right? Or no? Or I don't know if it's called patterning a feature, but you have the faces. You can pattern the body.
Yeah, when you click pattern, your options have faces, bodies, and features. Yeah. But I never use the feature as it's described here, because for that you have to like create a feature out of something existent. I don't know, and like all of these are kind of like meant to be called features. Mm-hmm. But you have a little more control over that, and it goes a little more procedural and calculated. But I usually say you either pattern a body or some face, like a number of faces, because the difference really is, what's the difference between a face and a feature? A feature is a number of faces. That's like the best way I can describe it. This also looks kind of like the muzzle brake for a gun.
Yeah.
Let's see. So there are some like cool things you can do definitely with patterning, and with rather than doing a body, sometimes it makes sense to do a face. So this kind of looks like what we want. Other than like we would add the patterns here and there. Let's see what else is not as straightforward. And to answer the question, yes, you were right about predicting how to go about it. So that's exactly how it is. Seems like everything else is straightforward.
Yeah, it didn't seem that. Oh, actually, so that little part you know that bottom part that connects it to the main body. If you go up with your mouse to the left, yeah, that on the bottom
this one?
side.
Oh, this one?
I can't see your mouse. The one to the right from that. So basically the slope.
This
thing,
one?
yeah, that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I was wondering how to go about that because it seems circular, but it also has a curve, and then it looks like the sides are like fillets.
That's what it is, really. Let's just say let's do this thing, but here, we need a cylinder that attaches to another cylinder like this. Let's hide it. So we have like this thing coming in, and it joins like that. And the designer of that airbrush, for whatever reason, felt like you need this connecting piece to help strengthen the joint here.
Yeah.
Because if it's being like welded together, you need that extra arc to take the strength, or to strengthen the joint. Well, let's see. We can do a sketch like this, which, see, like when I do these like press and pull, I end up with some odd angles. And I would much rather actually do a sharp one first, like this, and then I will fillet it out.
Yeah.
If it starts to get broken here, I can just delete stuff and then close it. It looks like I will have to see, like there was an extra one there. I'd rather redraw.
It's a bit scary with that fillet.
Yeah. But since you know about those ends and you keep them in mind, it's okay. So
can you delete those lines? Is that also
it's a tool called Trim. I also have it in my panel. It's in Sketch, Trim right here. There's also a shortcut for T. So we have this center line that will be connecting. We're just gonna do a press pull on both sides like that. Not gonna cut it. We're gonna add a body, and then we will fillet like this.
Oh yeah.
Because it sort of looks like a cylinder, and then again, this is just my quick way about it. But you can also just do like a bendy cylinder that's gonna be like swiped by a profile. Like so many ways. This is just like the simplest one. And once we have that, we just join everything. So 1, 2, 3. Now we have all these nice common edges. So we're just gonna do a fillet here to make it flow nicely, and then a fillet here to make it flow even better, like this. So now all of that kind of like organically connects. And basically that's what a fillet is, right? It's not only used to treat like the outer edge, like here. It also uses is good for treating the connections.
Oh, that's great. So there's actually another point that I wanted to ask, that how you go about that, because it seems that you're doing things in a particular order, you know, like you rounded it out before you combine.
Yep, I'll show you the difference. So basically, in this case, whether or not I round it up before I combine or not, it will let me round it up.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm just like I come, you know, like I had this somewhere I had a traumatic experience of not being able to do it, so now I go like cautiously about it. And I'm like sort of predicting just in case there is an error, but it's kind of like intuitive, right? In this case, doesn't matter. I combined it. What matters is the order of fillets sometimes, because if I do this fillet first, obviously it goes higher, and then the second one will be slightly different. So it changes the shape.
Yeah, I see.
And this, for example, shape is a lot more organic than what I had before. And it also matters because this going about it like this is kind of like not exactly the right way, I would say. You gotta be careful about how thick your fillets are. The shapes needs to look good, right? Like this is a much better iteration than before. It just looks more natural. But normally that shape, I think, would have been better done. Did I undo it accidentally? Yeah. That shape would have been better done in sculpting, which is in lesson 3. Because it will look more organic without these extra weird lines. They may or may not show up in final renders. I have this little plugin for Fusion that I found on their forum that lets you switch between lines and no lines.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it exists here. You can just go to settings, visual style, shaded, and this is all there is. So you don't need that, but this is just like a shortcut. So you can sometimes turn off the lines and look at the shape. And in render, it may show up in a different way as well. Because this is CAD, and when it's translated into polygons, it may look a little different. All this weird, see how like light is catching here? It may look a little different. But in terms of achieving that shape, this is definitely one way to go.
Cool.
I wouldn't say that this is a good way to connect a pistol grip to the body, because it's too obvious that you did that, if it makes sense. Like, you can always tell when you just connected two primitives and then made a fillet in between, rather than going the sculpt way. But sometimes it's whatever faster works better, and you can just neglect the difference in the look. Let's take a look at your last image, and we'll wrap it up after. In terms of questions, you were asking about making changes, so we touched up on the timeline, order of doing things. Again, you see that sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, probably trying out some stuff, see what looks.
Yeah, you can always roll back, like, and it's actually. I'll try to show one more example here. Let's do it on this one. When you're doing those cuts, like, here's where the order of things matter. If I do a chamfer on this lip, like this, and then decide to fillet this. No, it's fillet. Fillet. This is what I'm gonna end up with, right? This is just a particular look. But if I fillet this first, and then chamfer the lip, I get a different look.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, clearly it matters, but again, then I have a problem here, like, how do I go about this? Like, this looks broken. If I fillet this, it will also look broken. So you gotta think about it. Maybe you should also fillet this before you do that chamfer, like that. And now you create that lip, and it just goes nicely through the whole thing, and it just looks better.
Yeah.
So yeah, the order of things matter, but not only they matter for the look, but they also change your options. And sometimes maybe I'm just really going for this. Like maybe that's exactly what I want. I want this sharp. So there's no like correct way. There's only whatever you prefer.
It's probably doing it often, and then you'll kind of anticipate how to do it.
Yeah, you will have your own method, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last question you had was gradient chamfer. It exists more with fillets, I think, rather than chamfers. So, for example, it's called a fillet with variable radius. It will ask me to place points where the radius starts to change. And then so like for example right now it's where was it, almost universal, but if I add another point in here, let's see, where was the points? Fillet, variable radius. I will only like place a point, for example, like a couple of points here. And then this will allow me to do this full chamfer there, and then gradually like tune it in like very slowly, because I have like a lot of more points to control it. I mean, it's like I rarely use this because it just looks you have to have a lot of control. You better be precise about your input, because here the stepping is 0, 2, 5, 6. It needs to be like at least 0, 2, 4, I don't know, 5? No, like 8? Yeah, see, like it's like a mathematical curve, right? So yeah, this exists. So basically, since kind of like the topic of today is like chamfers, in a chamfer you have options of distance at an angle, two distances, which is similar to that. You just control these more accurately, but if you need to control them by the angle, you can just say the angle. And then your equal distance. And then for fillets, it's constant radius, chord length I never use, and then variable radius is what I showed. So the last picture is actually what we kind of touched upon in terms of the pistol grip, where in the image you can clearly see that if you sketch out this full shape, this looks more like there was another shape blended with it. If it looks like that, you should probably do it this way, which means as you're sketching your shape, this is where your shape will end, and then you will take a box and cut it in and merge it with some fillets. A lot of times, because that's how it would have been machined and put together in real world. Like in sub-D modeling, it's all about like edges and faces. So of course you're not thinking about sorry, I need some water.
No problem.
So in real world, you're thinking about how it should be manufactured, and here it's like you're mimicking that process. In terms of cuts, that's really straightforward. That's exactly how it's done. Plus, you see that in this shape on the left, it was shelled before. It's hollow inside. That's that's how you get that. What's interesting is, I mentioned this before as well, this whole shape is better done in Sculpt, because you will be able to get a better flow of these little things. let's kind of take a stab at it. It's like one thing I hate. The grips, if you start from just sketches, they look very boxy, and they will always look boxy if you start with boxes.
See, even with the fillets and stuff.
Yeah, you will see that you arrived to that shape through a fillet, and it's kind of like just it's clear that that you did that. So let's say this is roughly the shape. I didn't do it straight because when you're rotating, it asks you to select the anchor, like the point of rotation. See, this one is at an angle.
Yeah.
So I need to select like the top face because it's straight relatively to the world coordinates. So you only need to rotate it to 90. There you go. So and this is the comparison, right?
Yeah.
Like roughly. So we see that there's a fillet on the back. Like yes, you can do it like this. I just pressed Control to select the other one. So this is what it's gonna look like.
Okay.
That's kind of close enough, and then maybe even here. And then it needs to be also smooth on the front. Like that. A lot of times that would be enough to sell the look. And then to get this little like what's it called, like a finger, like a place to like rest. Yeah, you basically sketch that, I guess, from the side. Make sure that you have that nice flowing shape in there.
You did that by holding down your mouse, right?
Yeah, once I start, I just click, and then hold on, from the very beginning, click and start dragging. You gotta have like a little bit of the first line needs to be straight, and then click and drag will curve it. Okay. But again, it creates more complications that I like. So have this, move it in place. Just worry about that it's organic and nice. And then you combine them, and then you blend them with a fillet.
Yeah.
Like that. So, like in this case, it sort of works. I mean, again, depending on how wide the shape is and stuff, it will blend in more with the sides. Like this is like an approximation. But in reality, what needed to happen, and I'll just jump for a second here. All those grips that look complicated, they also need to be modeled in the sculpt environment with counting the edges precisely and planning for features. So you will just be doing like oh wait, hold on, go back. This is what come on. This is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
It will be a much more organic, nice way, and less, like far less steps. And this one, when you compare, will never look like you just filleted it together.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
It looks nice and flowing. Plus, you can just go back and like edit this as you want, or like preserve the symmetry, so you get like more of that natural, nice, correct shape. And in a way, I think that that's how all of those things are done, really, for CAD. Like, nobody really sits and pieces together primitives and then fillets them. But for concept art, it works. Because so like it's honestly, if you had to do everything right, then you'll just go crazy like in a couple of hours. Because really, the right way is whatever makes it easier for you. The only reason I'm using Fusion is because I don't want to think, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to count edges. I don't want to worry like how it's gonna sub-D. And that's why I'm here. So whatever I can like hack together, that's fine. That works.
Yeah. The Boolean and the combining, that's so cool. I mean, I hate doing that in polygon programs. You have to worry about all those stupid faces and all that stuff for lighting or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But again, what's funny is that this grip is actually easier done in sub-D. Because the sculpt environment that we just went into, which we will talk about in third lesson, it imitates sub-D because you counting your edges, and in case somebody didn't understand like what's happening here, when we look at the sculpt environment like this, like, yes, you can pull them out, it looks like soft and gooey, and you pull on vertices and faces and edges. But what's happening in reality, if you press Alt-1, it's unsubdivided version of that. It's a box mode, right? So it's exactly how it would look in sub-D. And you can also do Alt-2. It shows you both, just like in Maya, like 1, 2, 3. And then Alt-3 shows you the subdivided version. It's just the topology looks slightly different than when you subdivide it. But the principle is exactly the same. If it doesn't look right in box mode, chances are like something's wrong in the subdivided as well. Because Maya has better instruments, or Maya or Max, for sub-D, and this grip already calls for sculpting. In this particular case, sculpting like organic shapes and sculpting what's it called? Like ergonomical shapes that are better to hold and stuff. A lot of times you'll just go into Maya, quickly do it, keep it quad, and you can import it back into Fusion, and then you can convert it.
As long as you keep it quad?
Yeah, you keep it in quads. Okay. You keep it very low poly count. So, like, for example, in Maya, it needs to look like this.
I see.
And then Fusion will be able to convert it. But it's not unheard of. Like Edon, he combines in his workflow. He combines Moy 3D and Maya, and I do that sometimes as well. So in the end, when you render, it doesn't matter. Whatever, like, and I explained that before as well. Like when you have a toolbox, you have like screwdrivers, hammers, like whatever, like all kinds of saws. All those instruments are done for a very specific purpose. So Fusion is better with boxy, hard surface stuff.
Yeah.
And sub-D is made for nice approximation of the curvature, right? So those grips, those halo-looking organic guns, They're all better done in sub-D. So you just have to learn a little bit here, a little bit there, and then you can combine easily.
Yeah, that's cool. That's why I want to learn more about Fusion.
Exactly.
Just another tool.
Yeah, it's just a tool. It's just a tool. Like there is no point. Like if Fusion is a screwdriver, and you need to hammer a nail, just don't force yourself using Fusion for that. You know.
Yeah.
Just separate it and make sure that whatever the result you're going for, you need to know if it's better done here or elsewhere. For example, modeling a face in Fusion, is it possible? Yes. In the sculpt mode, is it rational? Probably not. Like maybe I've seen it happen. Like I've seen people model like some toys. I actually I don't know if I have it saved. When I was 3D printing, I modeled like a giraffe, but I doubt that I have it here. It was let's just try to pull it up in Zortrax real quick. I don't think I saved it because like it's a one-time thing that I wanted to 3D print just to test the organic shapes. Oh, I didn't even save it. Wow.
That's cool. This is the program you use for your 3D printing?
It's what came with it, yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Let's see.
Did you print PLA?
No, I print in ABS.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, ABS. I guess that's what it is.
I mean, PLA and ABS is different. ABS is more like the plastic that you use for regular electronics. PLA is a little more brittle, but like, basically, it's all about like when does it break? You know, at what point. I don't have that giraffe, unfortunately. I don't think I saved it. But what I was saying is, it doesn't make sense to make organic shapes here after a certain point. Sometimes you can get away with that, but if it starts to become painful and like you're really struggling with it, maybe it's not the right way.
I see.
Although like the shapes that I did for the gun, I think I was able to get away with. Like the gun has some organic flow, very minimal, but I just honestly like don't use it that much.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. The next lesson, we will do the same. We will have something ready to discuss, right? Like some models or some overpaints if you have, and then again, same number of questions so we can like bounce off of that, and then that helps. Even though that I'm jumping a little bit ahead, it's still good to have to hear it like several times, kind of like pre-hear it like before you start actually learning about it, so you already have some sort of idea about what you're about to learn, like this example with sculpting. So it's not really spoilers, it's more like it's a prerequisite to hear about it at least once.